Good morning and welcome to the ISO Board of Governors General Session meeting. Please note that all audience audio connections will be muted until the Q&A portion of the call, and we will give you instructions on how to ask a question at that time. With that, I'll turn the call over to Chair Bhagwat. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ISO Board of Governors General Session meeting, and happy St. Patrick's Day. I would like to note for the record that I am wearing a green tie, despite the fact that it clashes horribly with my suit. We're going to start off by asking if anyone has any general comments which are not on agenda items.
But before we do that, Ash, I'm sorry, let me go ahead and take roll.
All right.
And I will self-report that I'm not wearing green. So, Chair Bhagwat?
Present.
Governor Bornstein?
Present, but not wearing green.
Governor Galitova?
Present and wearing green.
Vice Chair Leslie?
Present.
And Governor Shorey?
I'm present.
And all are present. We have a quorum, and we may now proceed. Thank you, governors.
Thank you, Roger. Sorry for getting that. Okay, so again, public comment, general public comment for items not on the agenda. Operator?
We are now taking public comments, and please feel free to place yourself in the question queue by using the raise hand icon located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You will be unmuted when it's your turn, and a pop-up message will appear, and you will need to accept this message to be unmuted. If you're on the phone only, please press #2 to enter the question queue. I do not see anyone in the queue at this time.
Okay, then let's move on to general session minutes.
Thank you, Chair Bhagwat. I need a motion to approve the December 17th, 2021 general session minutes.
So moved.
I'm sorry, who was that?
I think Jen moved and I'll second.
Thank you. And we'll take your vote. Governor Bhagwat?
Aye.
Governor Bornstein?
Aye.
Governor Galitova?
Aye.
Governor Leslie?
Aye.
And Governor Shorey?
Aye.
The motion passes. Thank you, governors. Back to you, Chair Bhagwat.
Okay, then next we have the CEO report. Elliot?
Thank you very much, Chair Bhagwat. Good morning, governors, and to our stakeholders. Great to be with you this morning. Having had a chance yesterday at the joint general session to go to provide an in-depth report out on my CEO report, I was just going to very briefly offer a couple of just quick framing comments for today's conversation, drawing on some of the items in the report. You know, as California works to achieve its SB 100 goals in a reliable and affordable and equitable fashion, for those of us in the reliability patch, resource adequacy really is job number one. And it's just so important to emphasize the level of focus on that topic right now within the state and here at the ISO. And the topics on today's agenda really touch on that. The effort at the California Public Utilities Commission to continue to refine and streamline the resource adequacy framework with the central procurement entity is an important step, and their commitment, as we've all seen, to getting additional resources onto the grid really is of a very high level. Just last year, as I noted in the report, California added 5,426 megawatts to its grid, the largest single addition of capacity on record. And as we know, over the course of the next 10 years, we're likely to see as much as 40,000 megawatts of new generation come online. For us at the ISO, transmission sufficiency is an absolutely essential part of resource adequacy. So in addition to the 20-year outlook, our new process, which is designed to take that long-term look at the architecture of the system and to help enable greater coordination between long-term transmission planning, power procurement, and interconnection queuing. Today's package of transmission projects that we're advancing for your consideration is an important additional add of infrastructure to begin the next phase of build out towards those long-term SB 100 goals. So resource adequacy really such an essential part of building the strong foundation for reliability and affordability in California. And of course, tomorrow we will be also very appreciative of all the folks who will be participating in the stakeholder process for the extended day-ahead market, in which we'll be closing out the first phase of work on that effort. And of course, all of our markets will only function effectively They're built on strong resource adequacy foundations. So all these issues are interconnected, and we're looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elliot. Next, we have the chair report from the Western EIM governing body. Is Chair Decker available? Yep, I see her. Please go on.
Thank you. So good morning, Chair Bott and Governors. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Western Energy and Market Governing Body. So the governing body met on March 15th, and in our general session, Utah Commissioner Chair and Chair of the Body of State Regulators, Thad LeVar provided an update on the BOSSER activities. Commissioner LeVar expressed optimism for the process or the prospects of successful EDAM approach, noting that the BOSSER certainly recognizes that there needs to be a durable structure and consensus. More is known about the EDAM. He expressed appreciation for the work being done by Commissioner Letha Tawney of Oregon on the GRC, and also the work of Nevada Commissioner Haley Williamson, who is on the Western Energy and Balance Market Nominating Committee. The BOSSER will be meeting in San Diego just ahead of the CREPC meeting on May 2nd in the morning, and the regularly scheduled BOSSER meeting is on April 8th. The Jay Satai of the Western Resource Advocates and chair of the Regional Issue Forum noted two new members, one from Nevada and one from the Montana Consumer Council. The RIF is working to develop a list of issues for the Western Energy and Balance Market to be considering as forward. After 2 years, the RIF is having its first in-person meeting, and that will be after CREPC in Diego on May 4th. Just a note yesterday, or Tuesday in our meeting, the Western Energy and Balance Market is closing in quickly on $2 billion of benefits. And to that end, we received an implementation update on Tacoma Utilities and Avista, who both became participants on May 2nd. The staff updated us on the representative of Tacoma and Avista spoke to the work that they did to prepare for the go-live, and everyone was complimentary, particularly of the work in working with the Cal ISO staff to get them prepared and to have a very smooth go-live. We're looking forward to seeing more benefits, and in May we will see the Bonneville Power Administration and Tucson Electric Power go live. As an update to the Board of Governors on the governing body market expert, recall that the position closed at the end of January and the hiring process is continuing. We will be doing interviewing of the applicants in March and April. This concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Anyone have any questions? I actually have a question. Did you get a decent set of applications for the position?
So, Chair, I would say that we didn't get as much response as we had hoped to get, but I do believe that the candidates who did submit their interest application all are qualified, and we are interviewing all candidates that did apply.
Great. These are obviously difficult times to hire. Any other questions? All right, and thank you. And next we have the decision on the transmission plan. Mr. Miller.
And let me jump in for just a moment and let it be noted for the record.
Roger, are you there? You look frozen to me.
Roger is definitely frozen.
Yeah.
Hey, Roger, if you can turn your camera off until you figure out the technical issues.
Okay.
All right.
While that's happening, it's Neil here. While that's happening, I think Mr. Compton is likely to be pointing out that we have received a number of letters regarding the transmission plan, that I believe those have all been made available to the Board of Governors and have also been posted.
Yeah, and we have received them.
Yeah. So if you wish, I could proceed, and I'll be more than happy
I'm
to
very
cut out.
sorry.
No, there's right.
I guess somehow I got booted out. I don't know if my internet failed, and I'm not sure if I got through the list of the 5 public comment letters or
You
not.
did not. We didn't hear you.
Okay, I apologize for that. So there were 5 public comment letters that were provided for the board, which I wanted to note for the record, and that was from City of San Jose, Golden State Clean Energy, LS Power Development, Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, and City of Santa Clara DBA Silicon Valley Power. And again, those have been provided to the board. So
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
Neil, go ahead.
Thank you. And first, good morning, Chair Bogwat, Governors. It's my pleasure today to introduce Jeff Billington to walk through and present the 21-22 transmission plan itself. First, I just wanted to also take a moment to thank Jeff and the entire transmission planning team for the thoroughness and the quality of the work in developing this year's transmission plan. I also wanted to thank the Public Utilities Commission, the California Energy Commission, and the transmission owners for their direct contributions in developing the plan itself, as well as thanking our stakeholder community for their collaborative participation through our stakeholder processes. As Elliot already mentioned, this year's transmission plan is a bit of an inflection point in the need for the development of resources as well as the corresponding and associated transmission. And this transmission plan was also a very impressive undertaking by Jeff and his team in light of also taking on the development of the 20-year outlook that we really see as being instrumental in setting the direction for this and future transmission plans. So with those opening comments, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff to present the transmission plan itself. Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Good morning, Chair Bogwat and members of the board. As indicated, I'll be presenting the decision item on the ISO's 2021-2022 transmission plan. Next slide, please. The annual transmission plan is being presented today for approval, and as Neil indicated as well, and Elliot, with the acceleration of new resource requirements, we are at an inflection point for meeting the state's goals and the increasing pace of load growth. And with this, the capital costs within this year's plan has increased from the plans in recent years. The ISO is always focused on costs, with the recommendations being based on long-term effectiveness and efficiency of the solutions. Next slide, please. The development of the 2021-2022 transmission plan was done through the ISO's transmission planning process that began in December of 2019 through phase 1 and phase 2 of the process to where we are now bringing the transmission plan to you for approval. Stakeholder consultation has taken place through all of the phases of the process, and there are 4 projects that have been identified in the transmission plan eligible for competitive solicitation, with phase 3 being initiated subsequent to the approval of the transmission plan as a part of this planning cycle. Next slide, please. Over the next 10 years, the need for new generation has escalated rapidly, which is driving an accelerated pace for transmission development in this and future planning cycles. Over the 10-year planning horizon, last year's planning cycle had 1 gigawatt per year of resources to be interconnected. This year's plan includes 2.7 gigawatt per year, and next year's transmission plan planning process cycle will have 4 gigawatt per year. This combination of dramatically increasing pace of renewable generation and forecast load growth is driving an increase in the transmission development needs. Next slide, please. We conduct the analysis of the transmission planning process in a sequential manner, starting with the reliability assessment to identify any reliability-driven project needs, then the policy assessment to identify any policy-driven projects needs, taking into consideration the reliability needs. and then the economic assessment to identify any economic-driven project needs, again taking into consideration the policy and reliability needs in a multi-value approach. In addition, we undertake every 2 years a 10-year local capacity study, and this year is the off year for this assessment and not undertaken in this planning cycle. And in addition, the interregional process is a 2-year process coordinating with other planning regions for consideration of interregional transmission project proposals as potential solutions to regional needs. We're in year 2 of the process, and there were no projects identified in year 1 to be brought forward into this planning cycle to be assessed. Next slide, please. The reliability analysis has identified the need for 16 reliability-driven projects for a total of $1.4 billion. 2 of the projects in the San Jose area are driven by significant load growth in the area and make up about $1.1 billion of the $1.4 billion. These 2 projects consist of HVDC converter, voltage source converter technology projects that provides for the needed flow control to supply the San Jose area and underground lines in the urban area to address the identified reliability constraints in the analysis. The reliability analysis also identified 2 previously approved projects for further review of storage procurement that is underway within the CPUC to mitigate the constraints. Next slide, please. And this slide just provides the complete list of the 16 reliability projects, including the 2 HVDC projects in the San Jose area that I earlier indicated. Next slide, please. And as I indicated, the 2 previously approved projects that are recommended to remain on hold for further review of storage procurement to mitigate the constraints are identified on this slide. And there is also 1 additional project to remain on hold to continue to review the long-term needs in the area. Next slide, please. The portfolios provided by the CPUC for this planning cycle included a base portfolio for the reliability policy and economic analysis, and 2 sensitivity portfolios for information portfolio or purposes. The base portfolio is based on 46 million metric ton greenhouse gas scenario for about 27 gigawatts of renewable and storage resources. One of the sensitivity studies was based on a 38 million metric ton scenario with approximately 32 gigawatts of renewable and storage resources. And the other sensitivity study was based on a 30 million metric ton scenario with approximately 33 gigawatts of renewable and storage resources. And this one had a focus on offshore wind in this sensitivity study. The analysis of the base portfolio identified the need for 6 policy-driven projects for a total of $1.5 billion. 2 500 kV, 230 kV substation projects to access renewable resources. The Collingsville substation north of the Greater Bay Area and the Manning substation in the Fresno Westlands area, along with the Grid Alliance Valley Electric upgrades to access renewables in the southern Nevada area, make up about $1.4 billion of the $1.5 billion of the policy-driven projects recommended. Next slide, please. And this slide provides the complete list of the 6 projects, including the 2 substation projects and the upgrades in the Grid Alliance VEA areas that I just indicated. Next slide, please. In the economic assessment, the ISO received a number of economic study requests, which included projects that would more reasonably be categorized as interregional transmission projects and several proposed reliability projects that cited material economic benefits. 1 new project was found to be needed as an economic-driven project for totaling $40 million, as indicated on the slide. In addition, the ISO undertook significant analysis of the impact of out-of-state wind in this year's planning cycle. And as an extension of this planning cycle, the ISO will test the interest in the Idaho, Wyoming resources that would underpin the economic study request of LS Power for the Swift North project, and we will report back later this year on this.
That's a good question. What do you think the timing will be on the report back on Swift North?
It'll likely be between the September to November timeframe.
Okay, thank you.
We will be undergoing the process and some stakeholder analysis through that, but in terms of on the analysis itself, will be in the September to the November time period.
Okay, thanks.
And as Neil indicated, parallel with this year's transmission planning cycle, the ISO undertook our first ever 20-year transmission outlook. The 20-year outlook provides a longer-term view of transmission needs to reliably meet the state's clean energy goals. And in 2022, the ISO intends to discuss the findings of the 20-year outlook in the ongoing SB 100 process, as well as potential additional stakeholder sessions. And we will be continuing to collect input on issues and parameters that could be considered and refined in future outlook development cycles, and we're considering that for starting in potentially 2023. And we'll provide the industry and yourselves an update on the 20-year outlook activities and communicate by the end of this year our intentions of going forward with this. Next slide, please.
So, Jeff, can I ask you a quick question? Does that mean the 20-year outlook will start to impact decisions made in 23?
No, in the 20-year outlook we'll be using as we're looking at the 2022-2023 planning process, the current outlook. What that's looking at is in 2023 is based upon gathering additional inputs, working with the CEC, CPUC through 2022, and looking at that is initiating in 2023 an update or refinement of the current 20-year outlook, 20-year transmission outlook.
Okay.
And then in addition to the reliability policy and economic studies, we take on additional studies for informational purposes. Within this year's transmission planning process, we undertook frequency, response, and dynamic system modeling studies. We also continued the wildfire assessment, and in this year's transmission planning cycle, we focused on the SCE and San Diego areas. And in last year's transmission planning cycle, we had undertaken the PG&E area, and in addition, in this year's transmission planning process, we updated the analysis in the North Coast, North Bay area. And as indicated in the policy sensitivity analysis, we did undertake significant analysis of offshore wind and the impact of out-of-state wind resources. Next slide, please. The projection of the regional high voltage transmission access charge has been included again in the 2021-2022 transmission plan, similar to previous planning cycles. The projection utilizes each PTO's most recent revenue requirement approvals, as well as capital projects in this year's transmission plan and all other previously approved transmission projects not already energized. As you can note in the highlighted area, there is about a $2.7 increase from last year's projection to this year's actuals, and this reflects an increase in operating costs and capital maintenance costs above the historical average projections for those non-ISO approved costs. And with this, the ISO will continue to explore with stakeholders cost-effective solutions to meet the long-term needs of the system as we've done through this planning cycle.
Jeff, can I just ask a question? The $2.70 is not only not new projects, it's projects that never went through CAISO at all, right?
Yeah, it's reflecting the capital maintenance and operating costs within not being hardening for the wildfires and those kinds of costs.
Right. I just want to be clear, since this is going to come up, that this is just CAISO collecting funds that the utilities have had approved by the CPUC without any review from CAISO at all.
Through the
Oh, sorry, but FERC, yeah. But these are not CAISO approved, so we are just the vehicle for collecting.
It's
Neil,
Neil here.
You want to try to provide a clarification?
Yes, that's correct, Governor Bornstein. As Jeff indicated, the starting point we use is the most recently FERC-approved information on the transmission owner's costs, and that includes all of their costs. And the reason we were calling out this $2.70 change is because it's quite noticeable on the comparison from last year's projection to this year's. And the reason for that step change is because of the increase in operating costs and other capital maintenance costs that are not part of the ISO capital program. So we're informed of their capital maintenance activities to ensure that our transmission planning is consistent, that we're not getting cross-threaded with capital maintenance plans. But we have no role in reviewing and approving their operating costs or these other capital maintenance costs.
And just to confirm, aren't the TAC numbers, the prices, those are nominal, right? They're not inflation adjusted?
Correct. Those are nominal dollars. We don't do this in constant dollars because the tax consequences would be, a tough way to do that kind of projection.
Yeah.
Taking into account the complex tax situation. Yeah.
And Neil, is this a one-time deal or is there a formula? Is there an ongoing cost?
So we use in this model, and apologies to Jeff for cutting in, but I'd helped develop this a few years ago, so it's probably deeper in the details on it. This projection uses a traditional historical projection of capital maintenance, operating costs, as well as Jeff indicated, the impact of all ISO-approved projects. But there really aren't good long-term estimates of future transmission owner operating cost increases or capital maintenance cost increases. So we use our traditional projections that we vet with the transmission owners, but there are differences that show up based on their actual programs and what they get approved at FERC. And we have to take that into account and correct each year's starting point based on what happened over the last year.
In other words, there might be another big bump in the next couple of years, and it's kind of beyond our control or knowledge.
Right.
We're not able to project those. That's correct. There isn't good information available about the long-term capital maintenance program requirements at the utilities.
Okay, thanks for that, those questions and discussion. We can go on to the next slide. Throughout the 2021-2022 transmission planning process, stakeholder consultation was incorporated in the process with 6 stakeholder meetings being held. There was general support for the transmission plan with comments related to giving further consideration of the proposed alternatives to the recommended projects and consideration of near-term solutions at lower cost. And then there was also concerns with respect to the portfolios that were provided, identified, that were provided by the CPUC, and related to the portfolio mapping and discrepancies between the mapping and the resource procurement of the resources. And there was also, again, concerns with the reliance on remedial action schemes identified and in lieu of transmission upgrades. And with this, in 2022, the ISO will be continuing the review initiated in 2021 of the remedial action scheme guidelines that are included in the ISO transmission or ISO planning standards. Next slide. So in summary, the transmission plan has found a need for 23 reliability, policy, and economic-driven projects for a total of approximately $2.9 billion. As indicated, 4 of the projects are eligible for competitive solicitation that will be initiated subsequent to the approval of the transmission plan. And these include the 2 reliability-driven HVDC projects in the San Jose area and 2 of the policy-driven projects for the Collingsville and Manning 500 to 230 kV substation projects. Next slide, please. So with this, the ISO is recommending the 2021-2022 transmission plan for approval, and it continues to pursue low emission strategies in addressing reliability needs of the ISO controlled grid. It sets a foundation for the higher renewable energy goals and resource development that we've identified, and provides for prudent and economic development of the transmission system to meet the near term as well as looking into the longer term needs as well. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Any questions from the board? Okay, doesn't sound like it. Then I think we can open it up for public comment.
Please feel free to place yourself in the question queue by utilizing the raise hand feature located at the bottom of your screen. If you are on the phone audio only, please press #2 to enter the question queue. When asking your question, please state your name and affiliation. We do have some people in the queue.
Thank you. I am Manuel Pineda. I am Chief Electric Utility Officer for the City of Santa Clara Silicon Valley Power. Good afternoon. Good morning. I'm so used to this being afternoon meetings with my council or night meetings. Chair and Board of Governors, a pleasure to be here today. And just wanted to appreciate the opportunity and thank you for letting me comment on your 21-22 transmission plan. As I presented previously to the board, the City of Santa Clara is a data center hub for the entire state and country, and these data centers and the projects we're working on help support our global economy. We really do appreciate the efforts of both CAISO and PG&E in approving transmission projects to serve a rapidly growing load in Santa Clara and Silicon Valley Power. And we really applaud the staff's tremendous efforts to this process, resulting in CAISO's SVPs and the state's growth opportunities. I know you received my letter with all the details, so I just wanted to make a couple of main points today. I want to emphasize that your staff has really delivered on what they promised to the CAISO Board of Governors meeting almost a year ago when you approved last year's transmission plan. SVP endorses the approval of the 2 HVDC lines that were discussed in the presentation, and also recognize that other improvements will be required prior to those lines being constructed. I therefore do ask today that the SVP staff works with CAISO and PG&E staff to evaluate and propose further projects that meet CAISO's planning criteria. I'm hopeful that we'll continue to get CAISO support in these efforts. So in conclusion, just to summarize, we strongly support the recommendations to approve both the short-term and long-term mitigation projects in the SVP San Jose area. We recommend that CAISO work with PG&E and SVP to develop additional near-term projects to serve our load. And I do want to let you know that we've been tracking our load and sales, and our sales have increased already about 10% from last year. So our growth is happening. And we really want to thank the CAISO board for their support in addressing SVP's urgent transmission capacity increases needed to really support us, but really support the state and our global economy. Lastly, because it's very important, once again, and I know I did it, but you can never do it enough, I want to really thank CAISO staff for their significant efforts and all the work that was completed over the last year to develop and recommend the proposed additions that will increase our reliability. Really great work and a team effort, and we're really appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pineda. And I can assure you we are very much aware of load growth in Silicon Valley, and we will continue to work with you as needed to make sure that load is met. Any questions from the board? Okay, then I think we can move to the next comment.
Yes, my name is Jim Caldwell, and I represent the city of San Jose. And I want to also support the transmission plan and the HVDC lines into the San Jose area. And I would just note that last year's board vote at this point, that the draft plan that was voted out talked about monitoring future load growth. And the CAISO working with PG&E staff to develop the next Band-Aid on the 60-year-old 115 kV transmission system that serves Silicon Valley. And then now this year, we come to a recommendation to construct the equivalent of a Diablo Canyon nuclear reactor generation in the region. And that this is pretty jarring, and it provides, we believe, a reason to revisit the process as we transition from a 40-year period of flat declining load growth to one where we're seeing significant load growth, and especially since that load growth will not be uniform across the thing, but will show up and pop up in various places for various reasons. So we believe that both forecasting and permitting need to recognize this inflection point and change. In the forecasting area, last year's forecast had a slight decrease in load over the next 8 years in the planning horizon, and less than 1% difference between the base and the high load sensitivity case. This year, we're talking about 5+% load growth in the greater Bay Area and 10% plus load growth in the San Jose region in the base case. And so we believe this means that at the CEC, where the bulk of the load forecasting takes place, that we need to try to shorten up the timelines. We need more attention to the infamous dog process. That needs to include much more of non-traditional participants rather than simply the load forecasters from the IOUs who sit around the table. At the ISO, we believe that more attention needs to be paid to high load sensitivities, and also that there needs to be more visibility to load interconnection requests, since the ISO does not normally deal with load interconnection requests. It doesn't have the same visibility that it has through the generation queue, and we think that this needs to change. The objective should be to attempt to litigate the need determination for a project as much as possible before the board vote, rather than wait until after the board vote and after there's been an RFO to find a proponent, and then that proponent files an application, and then we start the process. That the need determination should be as nearly as possible litigated prior to the board vote. On the permitting side, in this particular case, last August, as we went through the process, the ISO basically said, okay, pencils down, on piecemeal upgrades. It's not going to be enough. We're going to be playing whack-a-mole forever. There needs to be new 500 kV or 230 kV sources into the region. That is the point last August where we should have begun outreach to the local governing bodies in the area who were going to be charged with dealing with this construction. The city of San Jose, we only had 22 days to respond to the draft transmission plan where the HVDC lines surfaced before comments were replied. It's only been like 6 weeks that we've had to assimilate what's going on and take care. We are committed to supporting this effort. We think it's critical, but we think that more needs to be done to try to anticipate these things as we move forward, and that we need to revisit the processes. But most of all, I also want to reflect again what Santa Clara said, and that is the tremendous work that the ISO staff did this year to at least get us out or get this project some sunlight, some sunshine, and move forward. But we have to institutionalize that. It can't be some last-minute thing where people do heroic measures to make changes. This has to be institutionalized as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Any thoughts? Neil?
Yes,
I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Jim. This was very good to hear, and thank you to the ISO staff. It's always heartwarming to know that our hard work is appreciated. I just wanted to ask you to give a little bit more detail. You mentioned the forecasting permitting needs to change, and some of it is connected to the CEC. Are you saying that we need more coordination between the CEC and the ISO, or more insight into processes, or both of the above?
Well,
because you said there was more visibility needed in the interconnections too.
Who's going to turn down the idea of more coordination between the agencies that are involved here? And let's include the PUC in this also. I mean, clearly that is something that everybody talks about. What I was trying to get to here is that again, we've all talked about it. Jeff talked about it. Neil talked about it, that we're at this inflection point, and that load growth and the decarbonization policies are going to lead to a very different view than what we had. And so I think what that means is getting down to the details of how all of these processes have been done and how we've got used to doing forecasting and how we've gotten used to doing things in a period where we had time, where there was no change year from year, and we're not there now. And so I think we have to go back and think about the details as well as the policies. And the policies, I think, are fine. I think the urgency that you folks and the PUC and the CEC has shown, and the greater cooperation between the agencies is very heartwarming. But again, I think we have to get down to the details, because that's where it really the rubber meets the road.
So less of a piecemeal approach, more of a wholesale, including everybody, better coordination, and more visibility to load, not just interconnection, which is not necessarily all under our control.
That's right. I mean, I'm not suggesting that you take over the load interconnection process, but the visibility to anomalies or to changes that you get from the generator interconnection process informs all of that forecasting and allows some early thing here. But you don't do that on the load interconnection side. Just getting a list of the load interconnection request from the IOUs and making sure that that is somehow posted, or not that that's going to directly lead to changing the forecast or approving projects, but it gives some visibility. The data centers in Santa Clara didn't drop down from Mars all of a sudden from last March till now. I mean, this has been known, it's been going on, but it's not visible because of the routine that we go through. So
maybe we can focus on changing that, Neil. And I'll ask you that. But quick question, just what did you mean by non-traditional participants?
Well,
who would
the
be a
process.
non-traditional participant?
The process, if it's called the DAWG, D-A-W-G, which is I can't even remember what D stands for except it's demand, but I don't remember what A stands for, and then WG is the working group. That's the process at the CEC that does this kind of work and that vets this kind of work. Well, what that's gotten down to is that whoever is the lead forecasting agent for the 3 IOUs and maybe a couple of other nerds sit around at a table and come up with these numbers. And, that's not what's going on right now with all the private capital that's coming in, with all of the outside influences that are happening. That process needs to be much more open. And, to this day, for example, the Public Advocate's Office from the PUC, when they saw these HVDC lines, their first comment was, well, are you sure that load forecast is there? Didn't you know that Title 24 requires data centers to put solar on the roof, and was that taken into account? And obviously the answer is yes, and I'm not trying to say that the Public Advocate's Office is wrong for questioning the load forecast, but somehow those kinds of conversations need to take place well before we get to this stage of this board vote. We need to litigate those things. We need to run those to ground as soon as we can rather than wait until after these board votes and we start the formal process.
Yeah, hey, Jim, this is Elliot Maines. I'm just to jump in real quick here. So, Jim, thanks a lot for your feedback. And obviously, you've been a real leading light here in California and making a lot of these points. And I think I also really appreciate, I think what you acknowledged, sort of the encouragement of seeing the much greater coordination between the CEC and the CPC and the ISO. And I think the 20-year transmission outlook really is our returned favor back to all of you that have been advocating for this for a long time. And I think it's a really important stake in the ground. So, and the points, and so I think a lot of progress here. We are, as you've heard me say, and you see in my CEO report, the synchronization of these processes is an absolute super high priority for myself, for David Hochschild, for President Reynolds, all of us working. And I think your points about trying to figure out how to bring the public advocate perspective further up into the upfront due diligence process so that those questions can be asked prior to decision making, so we don't have a sort of a second round of sort of after the fact questioning once projects are approved, is a really good insight, something worth talking about, and we look forward to working with them as well. But I just want to make sure that we consolidate the gains here and that you hopefully feel heard, because I think you guys have been ringing the bell, and we are absolutely committed to building on this foundational step of the 20-year outlook and improving the communication coordination. So thanks for the perspective that you're shared today.
Okay. Well, amen, brother. It's a breath of fresh air to see how much better we are now than where we were, but we've still got a long way to go.
Yep.
And so,
thank you.
Thank you for being here.
And Elliot, to the extent that the ISO can serve as a convening agent or an overall umbrella and have a process identified where each agency fits into a specific role, so that there's a holistic oversight for everybody of the process. And it's not everybody just working on a small piece in isolation and then having to play catch up at the end of the game. And I know we're trying, but obviously we need to do better with permitting as well. And local government.
Right, but I want to emphasize, no, thank you, Governor Griffith. I want to emphasize that, what is essential here is this is a three-way collaboration. With the CEC and the CPC, we all have key roles. We all have to step up to our own important perspectives, certainly on the transmission side. And I really do appreciate, President Hochschild, President Reynolds now, they've all been leaning in on this, and we need to continue making progress. We're absolutely committed, and with the public advocate, we continue to extend the arm of collaboration there as well. They provide an important function, but we got to get them in the right part of the process. So that's I think a big challenge. And as you know, this year we're going to be taking a look at just the way that we codify these processes. It's a corporate goal for us in 2022, and we're hoping to be here at the end of this year with an additional round of material progress on this area. It's a top priority for us at the ISO. So just want to make sure that you guys know that for all of us in management at the ISO, this is core foundational, and we're committed to the collaboration.
Thank you. Any questions?
I just have one more question, Jim. Jim, this is Mary Leslie. Just a quick question about your thoughts about permitting, which is normally a local function, right? A local government function.
Yes, and that's I think the point that I was trying to make, that for transmission projects, the sort of permitting is generally revolves around a CPCN from the PUC, and that the local agencies tend to be simply parties to that PUC proceeding. And I just would submit that I don't think that that's the way that this ought to work, that I'm not suggesting that the local governing bodies have some monopoly over being secret lead agency or anything, or even want to do that. But the last time we got into a project like this one was the Trans-Bay Cable about 10 years ago, and the city of Pittsburgh was actually the secret lead agency when that permitting was done. And this time, I just think that there needs to be more outreach at the beginning rather than doing the, we need to do this in parallel. We don't want to wire all this in series. What we've gotten into is the habit of doing things serially in each location, getting to a decision, and then handing it off to the next agency in the line. And all that leads to is these longer timelines and everything else. We need to get more parallel, and that means bringing in the local governing bodies who are going to be dealing with that 3-foot wide, 5-foot deep trench through the downtown San Jose for these lines. It's fine to talk about undergrounding and existing rights-of-way, but that doesn't change the construction. The substation at Substation B is surrounded by land that is highly developable. And simply to say we're going to put an HVDC converter station there without dealing with those land use issues, it isn't going to work. And unless we bring folks on at the beginning and start that process at the beginning, then we're going to get in trouble.
Maybe it's time for us to move on to the next comment.
Thank you, Jim.
Michelle, we'll go to the next caller in queue.
Yep, caller, your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Governors. My name is Jin No. I'm Policy Director for the California Energy Storage Alliance, or CESA. We represent over 100 companies in the energy storage ecosystem in California, and we wanted to express our support for the approval of the ISO's draft transmission plan, which will approve transmission investments to support our forecasted needs and projected resource build-out. As you probably know, energy storage is unique in that it can be flexibly and economically sited anywhere where there's available transmission capacity, but we know that energy storage will need access to clean charging energy, and so we believe the draft transmission plan advances these ends. We also continue to appreciate and support the ISO's consideration of storage as transmission alternatives where feasible and economic, which supports the goal of being cognizant of costs and aiming to advance economic efficiencies. And lastly, we want to express our strong support for the 20-year transmission outlook, which we view as an important milestone and initiative to assess how we can meet our 2045 SB 100 goals. And going forward, we look forward to continuing to work with the ISO team to consider ways we can refine that longer-term outlook, along with CPUC staff on how to map our longer-term storage needs and to optimize our transmission investments to not only meet our 10-year outlook, but also, seek ways we can identify least regrets investments that can support our longer-term projections as well, given the lead time of transmission investments and to the earlier point about avoiding piecemeal or incremental build-out that might be less optimal if not viewed in conjunction with this longer-term outlook. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to deliver these comments in support of the draft transmission plan.
Great. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, then let's move on to the next comment.
Caller, your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Christine Kausert. I'm Vice President of Asset and Regulatory and Electric Engineering at PG&E, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. PG&E applauds the work that CAISO staff has completed in developing this year's transmission plan, including the inaugural 20-year transmission outlook. PG&E considers this effort as highly valuable for policymakers, planners, and stakeholders as the state moves towards a clean energy future. In particular, PG&E thanks Jeff Billington's Transmission Planning North Group for the close coordination and collaboration with PG&E's transmission planning team. We also appreciate the changes that were made in the revised draft plan in response to PG&E's comments. Out of the 23 projects being proposed for approval in the transmission plan, 18 are in PG&E's service area. This includes 13 reliability projects, 4 policy projects, and 1 economic-driven project. Overall, PG&E believes that the transmission plan achieves a good balance of addressing near-term issues while also considering long-term needs, positioning the grid to meet California's aggressive decarbonization goals, which we also share at PG&E. PG&E agrees with the identified reliability projects, and we also support the proposed policy projects and understand that CAISO needed to act now, given that even greater quantities of renewable resource development are expected to be added to the assumptions in the next year's plan. Given this pace, PG&E cautions that additional study work is likely to be needed next year, especially for the 4 large projects that will be competitive, since these involve major changes to the grid, such as new substations in the 500 kV system and the first use of high voltage DC in PG&E's footprint. We will need to ensure that there are no impacts to the WEC or neighboring systems. If any additional scope is identified to mitigate any impacts, it needs to also be identified soon. In-service dates for these projects, as soon as 2028, are aggressive, especially for such complicated projects with potential competitive developers. Building brand new 500 kV stations, new 230 kV lines on land and under the bay, and high voltage DC lines and converter stations in highly populated and dense areas will be complex undertakings. The competitive solicitation process, additional studies, coordination with affected systems, and winning bidders will all take time. Permitting at the CPUC and other agencies will also need to be processed efficiently and timely. PG&E thanks CAISO staff for accepting comments sent by PG&E and revising the draft transmission plan, and with that, PG&E requests that the CAISO board approve the 2021 to 2022 transmission plan. In addition, PG&E applauds the CAISO for completing its inaugural 20-year transmission outlook. We consider this effort as highly valuable and look forward to continuing to see this work advance. For improvement in the next iteration of the 20-year outlook, PG&E recommends that CAISO consider several additional factors. One being studying the impact on lower voltage transmission in order to get a better understanding of the total cost with the proposed plan to achieve SB 100 goals. CAISO should also continue working with the CEC to improve the electrification load forecast and increase granularity in order to understand the impacts on local transmission systems and ideally be able to do better integrated planning of resources and load together. As an example, PG&E's own internal forecast of EV adoption is running considerably higher than the CEC mid-range. This may reflect the greater adoption rate assumed with state and federal policy incentives, which are not considered in forecasts by the CEC. More detailed reliability studies are needed, including the full suite of dynamic studies, transient stability, and inertia and frequency response. Without
I'm not sure that this level of detail is sort of helpful at the board's level. I think we very much appreciate your input, but I think it makes sense for it to go into the next transmission planning cycle rather than here.
Okay. Well, then I'll wrap up and say that we greatly appreciate and support the 20-year outlook as valuable as the study continues. Thank you.
Thank you. And we really do look forward to working with you. It's just that, frankly, this is at a level beyond the board's sort of level of involvement.
It's Neil here. If I could just provide a brief response, was that we totally agree that additional detailed engineering studies need to be conducted. That's part of the importance of actually us asking the board for approval of these projects so that we can move forward with selecting a competitive sponsor who would actually be responsible for building them and getting on with that detailed siting work and the detailed engineering work necessary to test these out and to flesh them out in more detail. So I'd say we totally agree with all of those comments, and we see that as a part of the process that we need to move forward with. Thank you.
Any questions from the board? Okay, let's move forward to the next comment, and I'm going to ask the commenters sort of keep their comments down to about 3 minutes because we have several more commenters and I want to try to stay somewhat on schedule. So.
Good morning, Board of Governors. This is Caitlin Leo-Terrace speaking today on behalf of the American Clean Power California. American Clean Power, or ACP, is a national organization which champions policies to transform the grid into a low-cost, reliable, and clean power system. ACP California is a project of ACP focused in California, and I'm really here today just to express our deep appreciation for the work that the CAISO team put into the transmission plan this cycle and to support approval of the transmission plan. As you know, this year's transmission planning process was a major lift, and on top of that, the team took on the 20-year outlook, which really did provide valuable information to the entire stakeholder community. So we're very pleased with the results of the 21 to 22 transmission plan, pleased to see a number of projects, including some very efficient and relatively low-cost projects included, as well as a kind of view towards the longer-term needs of the system. So with that, I think I will conclude my comments and again express our appreciation to the CAISO team.
Thank you very much. Their support is very much appreciated. Questions from the board? Okay, then let's move on to the next comment.
Hello, this is John King with LS Power. We're the sponsor of the Swift North Transmission Project. And I do want to recognize and commend CalISO for studying the transmission needed to deliver to a CalISO delivery point, the out-of-state wind identified in the CPUC IRP. And also for designing an additional step to evaluate the level of interest in Idaho wind, which is deliverable over Swift North. But I also want to point out that a study of the CalISO, Idaho Power, NVE, Pacific Northwest show 8,800 megawatts of non-solar renewable generation deliverable over Swift North. And while we encourage CalISO to conduct their due diligence, we would ask that they do it in a shorter time frame. And the reason we're asking for that is timing. The studies for transmission, for out-of-state transmission in this cycle are done with 2030 as the base year. And that's a reasonable time frame in transmission normally because of the length of time to entitle and build transmission. I would point out to the board that the southern half of Swift North is operating. It's called Online, and it's fully subscribed and paid for by Nevada ratepayers. It's a form of interregional cost allocation, with Nevada ratepayers paying almost 50% of the combined project cost. And upon completion of the northern portion of Swift North, a transmission use agreement with NVE kicks in, allocating approximately 1,000 megawatts of the combined line to them and 1,100 megawatts to LS Power, which is what we are offering to CalISO to own the economic value of and operating control of. Swift North can be operational in 2025. That's why I'm talking about timing. It is the southern half is built and the other half is shovel ready. That is rare with transmission, and that's why it means if it is approved early enough in 2022, it can be operational prior to the summer of 2025. And we all know what those current reliability issues are in California. And Diablo Canyon Unit 1 is set to retire in December 24, and Unit 2 in December 25. The OTC plants, approximately 3,000 megawatts, which were delayed, are set to retire at the end of 23. So the reason I bring it up is I think the step to ask is that, while you're doing this due diligence check, that you act in parallel such that Swift North could be approved in a timely manner in 2022, which would make it possible to deliver an operating 1,100 megawatt path, delivering renewables and providing the economic benefits identified in the CalISO study, which had a DCR ratio of greater than 1 to 1 in their most recent analysis. And from that standpoint, we just think it also provide the incentive when you're doing the market check for load-serving entities to evaluate renewables deliverable via this path, because summer 2025 capacity is important to them from a reliability standpoint. And that's my comments. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. King. Any questions?
Ash, I have a question of Neil.
Yes.
Neil, my question is, to this point that LS is bringing up, in your process, how do you balance the need to update and build new in California versus these out-of-state projects?
Well, thank you for that. Actually, it is a complicated question right now, because really the two different ways that transmission moves forward to address new resource requirements is either through identification, through coordination with the state agencies about the policy direction to pursue particular baskets of resources, or if load-serving entities are actually going through their RFO processes and actually awarding contracts and pursuing resources that way. So either state policy direction collaboratively worked out between ourselves and the state agencies, or actual projects being signed up and put under contract. In this case, the policy direction regarding pursuing Idaho resources is still a bit thin. So that's why what Jeff mentioned earlier, that we're committing to an extra process to test out the load-serving entity interest in procuring Idaho resources, because that really is what is necessary. The comfort around pursuing that particular batch of resources is pretty key to this project's the set of assumptions that produce more positive benefit to cost ratios. And in our studies, what we've done and what's documented in this year's transmission plan are really the bookends or boundary conditions around testing a range of assumptions and understanding what it takes to produce a positive case for this project. So we've done the analysis to understand what it takes for this project to be something we can demonstrate is needed and in the ratepayer interest. And that interest in the Idaho resources is what it takes for that to be successful. And that's what we're going to seek to test out over the coming months. So that, like I said, it is more complex when we're dealing with out-of-state projects. This one also became a bit more complicated when we were made aware of not just the Swift North project, but also upgrades being required to the NP Energy system in order to produce that total capacity that would be shared between ourselves and NP Energy. So we have to take a harder look at those network upgrades and how those costs are being allocated as well. So we're fully committed to this. We think there's a lot of potential here, but we do have to do the rigorous job. It is ratepayer money, and we have to take that very seriously and make sure that what we're doing is in the ratepayer interest.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any more comments?
There are no more comments in the queue.
All right. Anything else from the board? Then, Roger, I think we are ready for a motion.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Bhagwat. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the ISO 2021 to 2022 transmission plan attached to the memorandum dated March 9, 2022.
So moved.
Thank you, Governor Bornstein. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Governor Leslie. Chair Bhagwat, your vote, please.
Aye.
Governor Bornstein.
Aye.
Governor Glitova.
Aye.
Vice Chair Leslie.
Aye.
And Governor Shorey.
Aye.
Thank you, Governors. The motion passes.
At this point, I think I'm going to call a break for a little over 10 minutes. Why don't we reconvene at 10:30 with our next item, which is the central procurement entity item. So everyone can take a break, and we will see you all at 10:30.
Thank you, Chair Bhagwat.
Partha, can we test your audio since you're coming up next?
No, thank you. Do I sound all right?
You sound good.
Great.
Just make sure you speak loudly and clearly when presenting. Thanks, Parth.
That's helpful. Can you hear me well from here?
Yeah, just maybe a little bit higher. Yeah, if you could just speak a little bit louder.
Okay.
But you're coming through clear.
Okay.
Thanks, Partha.
Christine, this is Anna. You can hear me as well?
Can you say a few more words, Anna?
Yes, I was just testing to see if you can hear me well.
Yes, thank you.
And I will speak loudly.
Great, thank you.
Okay, it looks like we're all back. Roger, are you there?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm here.
Okay,
we're ready.
All right, then we are ready to move on to the next item, which is the decision on the central procurement entity implementation and resource adequacy, availability, incentive mechanism, settlement modification. That was a mouthful. Anna, please.
Good morning, Chair Bhagwat, Board of Governors, colleagues, and members of the public. I am pleased to be introducing our proposal to implement the central procurement entity in the ISO tariff-based resource adequacy rules, as well as some changes to the settlement of our resource adequacy availability incentive mechanism. Partha Malvadkar will be presenting today, and I'm pleased to introduce him to you. Partha is our principal in resource adequacy, infrastructure, and grid enhancements. And before I proceed and turn it over to Partha, I wanted to thank stakeholders and staff for helping us formulate the details of this proposal. And I also wanted to note that the two items were grouped together in this initiative and are being presented to you together. However, they are not interdependent, and I'm sure you'll hear some of that as Partha presents the details of this proposal. And with that, I will turn it over to Partha.
No, thank you, Anna. And thank you, Chairman Bhagwat and CAISO governors, for the opportunity to present CAISO management proposal on central procurement entity implementation and RAIM settlement modifications. If you're willing to go to slide 2. So the changes we propose today first allows for the timely implementation of changes to CAISO's processes to allow for the CPUC's CPE to go into effect for resource adequacy year 2023. And second, fixes two additional issues in the CAISO's RA processes. Please move to slide 3. So as background on the CPE, in June 2020, the CPUC completed a multi-year stakeholder process to develop a central buyer system for local RA capacity. The CPUC ordered PG&E and SCE to each form a CPE to procure local resource adequacy capacity within each of their respective areas, with the goals, among other things, of providing cost efficiency, reliability, and customer protections. Starting in RA year 2023, the CPUC will assign each of the two CPEs their respective local RA capacity obligations to ultimately make showings at the ISO. To harmonize our program with the CPUC and to allow for the CPUC's CPE to go into effect for RA year 2023, we are first creating a new entity in our tariff called a CPE that is represented by a scheduling coordinator, which will allow local regulatory authorities, including the CPUC, to allocate local RA obligations to a CPE. To implement, we're making modifications to our software and settlements to enable CPE functionality. Finally, the main substantive issue we're addressing is clarifying how a CPE will be treated under CAISO's existing backstop capacity procurement rules and associated cost allocation processes. Thank you. So on slide 4, in terms of stakeholder feedback, the majority of stakeholders support the methods to incorporate the CPE in CAISO's proposed CPM capacity procurement mechanism cost allocation processes. In terms of differing positions we've heard through our stakeholder process, I note that one stakeholder advocated during the process that the ISO should allocate cost of collective local CPNs to the CPE, while another stakeholder disagreed originally with the ISO's application of the CPM cost allocation based on cost causation principles. Management, however, believes that this proposal aligns well with the CPUC's order on the CPUC to allocate the capacity procurement mechanism backstop costs directly to the CPE. We believe the concerns related to the backstop procurement cost allocation these parties have raised have been addressed by the CPUC in their proposed decision. I want to thank both the CPUC Energy Division staff as well as the CPE staff on their collaboration in this process and reaching an outcome with well-harmonized processes between the CPUC and CAISO. So in slide 5, on a separate issue but related, we identified that the associated cost allocation for local capacity backstop can have unintended consequences for certain LSEs that serve load in multiple TAC areas. Such entities are allocated a local RA obligation in each TAC area that's capped at an entity's system resource adequacy obligation amount. This treatment could lead to a higher local capacity procurement mechanism cost allocation as compared to an equivalent LSE that serves load in only a single TAC area. To address this issue, we propose a change to allow a cap for local RA obligations at the monthly system requirement for LSEs that serve load in multiple TAC areas. And note that stakeholders supported this change, and this is fairly non-controversial. Finally, we're proposing to make changes to our resource adequacy availability incentive mechanism to address a specific topic that gave rise to a past waiver request at FERC. As a way of background on RAIN, CAISO assesses non-availability charges and makes availability incentive payments to scheduling coordinators based on the percentage availability of each RA resource. Based on the monthly availability percentage, an RA resource is eligible for an availability incentive payment if its availability is greater than 98.5% for the month, and is subject to a non-availability charge if its performance is less than 94.5%. There is a limit placed on the amount of availability incentive payments they're allocating to month at 3 times the RAIN value, but not a limit on the amount of non-availability charges that are collected. Any excess non-availability charges currently among these limits are carried over and used in future months. And at the end of the year, any excess funds are distributed to LSEs. The CAISO identified that the current processes where excess funds are rolled over and allocated to load annually can result in financial burden and compliance issues for the ISO if resettlements calculations occur. In order to solve that financial burden of keeping the settlement charges as a liability when recalculations are needed, we're proposing eliminating the monthly rollover of funds. Rather than rolling over funds into the next month, the CAISO proposes to allocate the excess based on activity in that trading month, according to the allocation formula that currently applies to the year in process. Eliminating the monthly rollover ensures that resettlement issues that necessitated the April 2020 waiver filing will not reoccur. Additionally, eliminating the monthly rollover rule should simplify the program and increase the effectiveness of RAIN by ensuring that a resource performance in a given month is either paid or charged for that month. So in terms of stakeholder feedback, stakeholders representing load unanimously support eliminating the monthly rollover. However, one stakeholder in particular representing generators opposes the elimination of the monthly rollover and advocates for an alternative proposal where the ISO would prioritize paying refunds on the RAIN penalties rather than paying incentives while maintaining the current rollover process. We believe, however, that the alternative does not address the core financial liability issues that this proposal seeks to resolve or provide better incentives for resource availability. However, we are committed to looking at the broader issues around RA availability incentives and performance penalties in our upcoming RA enhancement processes to address these issues comprehensively that these stakeholders have raised.
Partha, can I ask you to say a little more about what the term paying refunds for RAIN penalties means?
paying refunds for rain penalties. This really has to do with if there's a recalculation associated with those charges. And so if there is, for lack of a better term, if in a given month we apply rain penalties to an entity, but later determine that those penalties were assessed in error, we'd have to recalculate and resettle those charges. So that's what that means.
That seems orthogonal to this discussion. I'm unclear why someone would advocate the ISO should prioritize that rather than paying incentives.
Yeah, and I don't think that they are advocating to pay to eliminate that. They're basically proposing an alternative treatment that would allow for that rollover to continue to exist while allowing that resettlement to also occur.
Oh, okay.
And so that's what we'd be looking at holistically.
Okay.
Then that raises a question for me. If in fact we're going to pay out excess funds at the end of every month, if there's a resettlement the following month, and you need to refund rain penalties, where's that money going to come from?
The resettlement would currently how the process works is we are actually looking for excess funds in future months. So basically using that rollover account to help fund that. But if there aren't funds available currently, we basically have to wait for that. We basically have to wait for the end of the year process and keep the liability on the book. But instead, the proposal would work where we would be resettling on a monthly basis for that applicable month. So if that type of event happened that sort of led to the waiver where we need to resettle, we'd basically be using the settlement numbers for that month in order to do the settlement with those same parties.
Right, no, I understand that, but where's the cash going to come from if we have to do a refund?
Yeah, that cash would come as well from those same parties, from meter load. Presumably, those would be basically the same funds that were used to pay out the incentive payments to load during that given month.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you for the questions. That was really helpful. This is really sort of in conclusion, we recommend the board approve management's proposal, which facilitates implementation of the CPE for the 2023 RA year, provides equitable treatment for local RA requirements for LLCs operating in multiple TAC areas, and addresses rain settlement and compliance issues. And thank you, and please let me know if you have any additional follow-up questions.
Any questions from the board?
I guess my question, Martha, would be, how do the stakeholders feel about this? You said at one point, point number 3 wasn't controversial. Are any of the points controversial?
I think currently the last one has some level of controversy. I think you'll hear from additional commenters that they had alternatives that they'd rather have that would allow for the monthly rollover to occur, as well as there's another proposal that would increase the incentives in a given month. Currently, the penalties work where the penalties are basically for generators are underperforming. They are only paying for the RAIM amount, but the overperformers can receive up to 3 times that RAIM amount for incentive payments. So some generators want it to be increased to 5 times. So that was sort of one example of sort of additional changes that people were looking to make. And that's really what we'll take on sort of comprehensively in that stakeholder process.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, then let's take public comment.
We are now taking public comments. Feel free to place yourself in the question queue by utilizing the raise hand feature located at the bottom of your screen. You will be unmuted when it is your turn. If you're on the phone, please press #2 to enter the queue. We do have a couple people in the queue. Caller, you're unmuted. Please state your name and affiliation before asking your question.
Yes, thank you. This is Brian Thaker with Middle River Power. So Chair Bagwet, Vice Chair Leslie, CAISO governors, again, my name is Brian Thaker. I'm Vice President of Western Regulatory and Market Affairs for Middle River Power. Middle River owns approximately 2 gigawatts of conventional assets and has developed solar and battery storage assets within the CAISO's footprint. We are currently developing other battery energy storage systems, including batteries that we're going to deploy in conjunction with our thermal assets, which we believe is a very promising way to preserve needed thermal generation while greatly reducing their carbon footprint. I want to begin by thanking CAISO staff who took extra time to engage with us on this issue. I especially want to thank James Lynn, Anna McKenna, and Partha Melvadkar for engaging with us on this issue outside of the formal stakeholder process. While we ultimately could not resolve our differences, I greatly appreciate our dialogue. We continue to oppose one aspect of the ISO's proposal, the proposal to eliminate the monthly carryover of excess rain penalty funds. We oppose this for several reasons. First, we believe this change, which will limit the pool of funds that can be paid out to generators with superior availability performance, upsets the balance of burdens and benefits of the RAIN program for a problem which the ISO has encountered only one time since RAIN was implemented. Second, we believe this change inappropriately conflates refunds of overpaid RAIN penalties with RAIN incentive payments. We believe this treatment is wrong, and it will detrimentally affect generating resources that achieve superior availability performance that enhances reliability. While the ISO is presenting this issue as a solution needed to avoid having to file another waiver of its tariff provisions at FERC, we believe there must be another way to permanently solve this infrequent problem that doesn't require eliminating the monthly carryover and fundamentally changing the RAIN incentive structure to the detriment of high-performing generators. In sum, we regret that we could not resolve our differences with the ISO. We still oppose the proposed elimination of the monthly carryover of RAIN penalties that were not paid out as RAIN incentive payments. Thank you for the opportunity to bring this position and perspective to you. Before I conclude, I'll just address two things that came up in the discussion. First, while we appreciate the ISO's commitment to exploring long-term modifications to the RAIN structure, again, we believe this is a solution that unbalances the RAIN structure detrimentally for generators. And second, Governor Bornstein, for your comments, I think Partha got the answer right. We had proposed prioritizing refunds, but leaving the monthly carryover structure intact. So if in any given month the ISO found itself having to pay out refunds and also paying out incentive payments, that the ISO would pay out the refunds first, but would still carry over prior month's amounts to be available for incentive payments. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Shelby, anybody else?
Yes, one moment. You are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carrie Bentley, and I represent the Western Power Trading Forum. Can you hear me okay? That's great.
Yes, okay.
So WPTF is a broad-based member organization dedicated to transparency and competition. I'm going to speak on the same topic as Mr. Thaker just did. First, I want to be completely open, and while I've made these comments verbally to CAISO staff during the initiative calls and to CAISO leadership just this week, I did not supply them to CAISO staff in written comments as we've been really busy with EDAM. So as some of you remember, when I worked at the CAISO, I was actually responsible for the RAIN design, so I wanted to provide some brief insights. RAIN is a program intended for suppliers, funded by suppliers and paid to suppliers, in order to reward high performers and penalize low performers. The monthly rate paid to high performers is capped at that 3 times the RAIN price, because at the time of designing RAIN, we couldn't predict whether the penalty bucket would be sufficient in all months to provide an incentive to performers. RAIN is a self-funding program, so the only money available to pay high performers completely comes from penalties on low performers. At the time, we felt it was better to smooth this bucket of money and apply this 3x cap and then roll over the excess to the next month, because we were concerned once RAIN was implemented, one month you might have a windfall, and then another month there might not be any money in that bucket. At the end of the year, the remaining excess was given to load, but that was so December wouldn't have different incentives from the rest of the year. In hindsight, I was definitely over-optimistic about the CAISO fleet, and just to let you know, every month since RAIN has been implemented, there's money in that bucket from low performers. So today, CAISO staff is proposing to keep that 3x cap on performance payments, and then to resolve a settlement issue by allocating the remaining money in the penalty bucket over this 3x cap to load. This doesn't make sense. It's a supplier program intended to shift RA revenues from low performers to high performers. This does things like allow resource owners that have made investments in their assets to recover these fixed costs. And therefore, verbally, WPTF has suggested to the CAISO that the cap should be removed, as it isn't serving any purpose anymore if the excess is just given to load in every month. If you remove the cap, then all the penalties are going to be paid to highly available supply, and this also completely resolves the CAISO settlement issues. And this is kind of the late-breaking proposal that Partha mentioned in his talk. So to wrap up, there's no rush on this aspect of the CAISO's proposal. There's no urgency at all. There's only been one settlement issue in 6 years. So WPTF respectfully and perhaps a little sheepishly asked the board to reject this aspect of the RAIN portion and direct the CAISO to consider this admittedly very late proposal by WPTF. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Looks like, Anna, you have a response?
Yes, I did have a response. If this is a good time to provide it, unless the Board of Governors have any questions, perhaps, of the commenters. I'm sorry, I triggered that hand too quickly.
Actually, I'd like to hear your response, and then we might have questions.
Okay. First, I do want to thank both Mr. Thaker and Ms. Medley for making comments today, and I appreciate their input because these are the RAIN structure, as Ms. Bentley noted. There are a lot of complications in the way these things are calculated each month and the incentive mechanisms, and we were not seeking to unravel the whole structure around this. I want to note, however, that although it looks like these things don't happen that often, in other words, that we don't make adjustments that frequently, we actually do. What triggered the one-time in 6 years event was the need to get an extension, get some leave from FERC to provide that waiver beyond the time period. However, from a month-to-month basis, we do make adjustments based on, and may have to refund money based on changes or reassessment of the penalties that were previously implemented. So it does happen more frequently than once every 6 years. That said, the waiver request was only occurred one time. So we do find a business need to actually fix this issue, if you wish, from a settlement perspective. On the issue of the cap, and it's I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but I do think that removing the cap may have other consequences. And although we're not inherently opposed to evaluating that, as a matter of fact, we are going to have to evaluate that very soon because it's been some time since we looked at that, and we have an obligation to look at that regularly. We're not sure if we could just do that at this time. And as Ms. Bentley noted, unfortunately, perhaps in the rush of things, that didn't get fully considered. However, we are planning on considering this issue in our next round of resource adequacy enhancements that were, and looking at it a little bit more closely as to whether it could either be removed or increased to another number. So those two elements, I think, drove us to believe that now it's appropriate to fix the business need now so that we can appropriately settle the refunds from a month-to-month basis rather than having to wait for the whole year. Under the current structure, we're required to hold these funds on the books, which actually is sometimes not clear where the money is going to come from. So this eliminates that business issue, and we were going to have to address the bigger design issues with RAIN and the cap in our next stakeholder proceeding, which is coming soon this summer.
That is good to know, because I have to say both of the comments made some sense to me. So I'm glad to know that we are going to revisit these issues. Any other comments or questions from the board?
Yeah, I've been uncomfortable with RAIN since I started on the board, and still I'm trying to sort out both the hard line boundaries. I forget, Partha said what they were, 94 and 98%, instead of just a continuous level. And what the, although I can see arguments for not paying the money out to load, I don't see necessarily an argument that the right use of the revenue is to pay high-performing providers. I guess there's no obvious argument to me of what the right compensation is, and 3 times seems arbitrary, and 5 times seems arbitrary, and uncapped seems arbitrary. How much money are we talking about here? Is that in here somewhere? I'm not seeing. What is the total RAIN, the typical monthly RAIN pot?
So in terms of charges, I don't have a full historical look, but I looked back from 2018, 19, and 20. In a typical month, the charges would be sort of range from $2 to $5 million in terms of what the penalty amounts would look like, and the incentives would probably be between $1 and $3 million on a monthly basis.
So $1 and $3 million per month total?
Yes.
So these are not huge amounts compared to the market.
Just remind me, what is the monthly energy revenue in the CAISO?
Do you mean total monthly energy revenue paid to all generators?
Yeah. I know it.
I'm not sure I have that number readily available, but
what is the annual?
A lot larger.
It's about $1 billion per month, is my memory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a lot larger than that number is what I was trying to say.
So this is on the order of a few tenths of 1%.
Yes.
And I'm not sure how much time we have here to re-educate me on all of this, but let me ask a couple more questions. What is the logic behind the, Partha, can you remind me, it's 94% is the bottom cutoff where penalties kick in, and 98.5 is the top where rewards get paid?
Yeah, that's correct. 94.5 is the threshold for low-performing resources, and 98.5 is the threshold for high-performing resources. That's correct.
And so anything in between those two numbers, you are neither penalized or eligible for any of the bonus.
That's correct.
And once you're into each of those categories, does it matter how far you're into the category? Or is the penalty the same and the bonus the same?
Yes, I believe that the penalties are the same.
So once you're at 94.4, the penalty is the same as 91.
Actually, the penalty is actually scaled for bad performance. The penalty increases the worse that you do.
Okay. And what about the other end? the bonus?
Partha, would you like me to, if I may, Severin, I can answer this. Yeah. Yeah. So the 94.5% is because roughly the planning reserve margin has a 5.5% expectation of a forced outage rate. So we're expecting resources to be out about 5.5% of the time, and that's how we got to that 94.5% number. The megawatts scale, so it's, your percentage out compared to that 94.5%. The rate is the same, so the penalty doesn't change, but the megawatts change. So the more megawatts you're out and more unavailable you are, the more megawatts are multiplied times that RAIN price.
Okay, and at the other end?
Same thing. The more you're available, but it's capped at 100%. So the most you could ever get is 1.5% times your RAIN or times your RA times that price. That's why we did 3x, because 1.5% isn't very much.
And what was the argument for the upper bound?
The 100%?
No, the 98.5.
Oh, that's a historic holdover from what RAIN evolved from the standard capacity product and was a negotiated settlement between load and supply and has no economic rationale.
Okay, that was the last part.
I can say that now that I don't work at the CAISO anymore.
Yeah. And what would be the argument against 100% performance is expected? There's some penalty for lower performance. And it's just, proportional, and the RAIN price would then be adjusted to, on average, still hold it constant, but sort of give just a smooth penalty so that there's no dead zone in the middle, and everybody always just has an incentive to perform better.
I mean, that might have been a better design. We just didn't get there. Yeah, but the issue we're having now is the rollover from month to month because
No, I understand that. I'm still.
Why we did it in the first place? Yeah, there wasn't. It was negotiated.
The background, yeah.
Yeah.
And so once we're in this position where we have what looked to me to be fairly arbitrary penalties and rewards, and it seems like we could solve the whole problem by changing the RAIN, and I'm not proposing doing this today. I'm just trying to understand where all the kinks in this are. By changing the RAIN compensation overall, and so that on average it gets it about right, and not necessarily making this a month-to-month or even year-to-year self-funded program.
And you have something?
Pardon, Ash?
Anna's hand is up.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Governor Burlington, I did not mean to.
No. If you would like to answer, please do. I'm just trying to.
Well, the only answer I can provide right now.
Is there a legal restriction or something?
Again, the RAIN structure does come from a history of and a series of both design elements that were designed at a time when the market was a little bit different, as well as a series of settlements. And as Ms. Bentley noted, there was just all this momentum behind the series of changes that sometimes perhaps things don't make 100% sense anymore. But our goal in this particular initiative was not to unbalance that. And I will note that the change we're making, and even RAIN, never takes away any compensation that the suppliers get through their capacity structure, right? It was always intended to be an additional incentive mechanism. There obviously are already expectations on performance to the compensation the generators get through the capacity contracts. So I want to make sure that we don't go too deep, if you wish, in the design elements of this. Our goal was to take care of a business need and not to redesign the RAIN structure. And we did not believe that we were unbalancing that to the degree that we're discussing this morning with the elements of the RAIN although I do appreciate that every time you make a change to the structure, there's parties who will be affected. And so we weren't prepared to go through a deep dive of the range structure and the pros and cons that were litigated over probably about 10 years now. So I will say that from our proposal's perspective, it was limited to the settlement structure we were trying to achieve, and we are totally committed to looking at the range penalties further. I just wanted to make that comment. I don't know if there's any other folks that
No, and I appreciate that. I'm just, in order to evaluate these changes, I'm trying to understand why we're doing it this way at all, and why. So we're talking about paying out monthly to Jen versus paying out to Load, or sorry, yeah, in excess, versus, another possibility is the CAISO is just the residual claimant on this money, and it goes to lowering the other revenue sources for the CAISO.
That would be a very different rate design than. It would be. Yeah, and so, we would have to restructure the whole.
No, and I understand that. It just seems like at some point we have to revisit, and maybe this just isn't worth it. It's not enough money but at some point when you start building fixes on fixes on fixes of a program that the explanation was there's no economic sense behind it, it was just a settlement, I get a little uncomfortable. And that seems to be where this program is, instead of just creating a regular incentive mechanism for performance.
And I appreciate those complexities. At this point, I don't know if I have a better solution other than I will put it out there that if the Board of Governors believes this should be addressed, at a later time to answer those questions more deeply, we certainly can withdraw this particular item and do so. And I also wanted to note that, this doesn't change the other two proposed changes we were proposing to make. We can hold off on this one if the Board of Governors believes that this should be a total rate design issue as opposed to just this one business issue that we were trying to solve.
Can I just, on that point, can you just remind me, and you said, or part of the, there was a disagreement about the urgency of this issue number 3. What is the argument for needing to deal with this now?
So on a monthly basis, so currently, as it currently sits, we hold the funds for the whole annual period in order, and for example, let's say we got a refund that was necessary to be made based on, in the month of March, change that was construed. Because the settlement is done on an annual basis, you have to hold that obligation of the books of needing to pay that generated back through the whole year. In the particular case where we had to seek a FERC waiver, we actually had gone beyond our settlement time period, which put us in a more precarious situation. So there's always a risk that we might end up there again. We haven't done that often. But there is a business risk on a month-to-month basis where we're having to carry those funds over. And there is a question as to, who should be paying for that refund, recognizing, for example, that the penalty was assessed in the month of March, and you might be doing this, the year after in some cases. So that's the business need, is to eliminate that carryover and issue with respect to the uncertainty, both to the generators as well as the load as to how this all gets resolved.
I guess I'm not following, and maybe Ash asked this question, and maybe I'm just not understanding. The proposal is that excess RAIN funds be allocated monthly to load. So they go out the door every month. And that means CAISO doesn't have that money anymore. And if there's a recalculation to load, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
Basically, the refund would compete with people who get incentive payments in the month where the refund is calculated.
Correct.
Right? So that if you have a refund from 3 months ago, and you're now in June, and you were paid an excess penalty in March, in June you're basically sharing funds with everyone who's entitled to an incentive payment.
That's the proposal.
That's the proposal, right?
Can we decide to either move along or, take this item and leave it for later as Anna proposed?
So that was what I was going to ask. Severin, if you're sufficiently uncomfortable, Anna has offered to remove this item from the.
Yeah, I think I am. I think I would like to understand this better. I'm not convinced that I understand that there was this compliance issue, but I think the resolution of it seems to have all sorts of other implications, and maybe this is just my larger discomfort with the whole design of RAIM, but I guess I'm not comfortable. If the rest of the board is comfortable voting for it, then I can just, or we can break it out or something. But I guess
Severin, if I could just offer a quick perspective, it's Elliot, just quickly. So I feel like this is really good conversation. It's helpful, honestly, to have Carrie, offering some perspective from the history. Goes years back. I would say that what we're balancing here is two things. One is, and actually I appreciate that she acknowledged both of them. I think the ISO identified a business need here. They've been working through the stakeholder process to identify a solution to that. The solution that's come up is what is being presented. As Carrie acknowledged, and Brian, literally the last few days, another thread has come in, making some arguments, which I think all of us are finding somewhat, at least intriguing, if not compelling, right? And worth more process. We're always trying to honor our stakeholder processes because I think the integrity of the stakeholder process is very important, and it's important to kind of introduce these comments to the maximum extent possible during that process. And I know we have other people with different perspectives. At the same time, I think we're seeing here with the questions that are being asked, and all of us recognizing the complexity, that this is something we want to get right over the long term, and it does raise some incredibly important principles of cost allocation and incentives, et cetera. So I think I would personally be comfortable if we did put this element of the proposal in abeyance and take it up in the broader conversation, just so that we can make sure that we have transparency and visibility into the issues at play. And we'll probably need to move out pretty quickly because there is a business need here that I think has been identified. I really want to validate the work of staff. They've done a lot of work, but we clearly have work to do as a team to make sure that we've got a clear understanding of these dynamics. I appreciate the line of questioning. So that, to me, that would be something I could live with from a management perspective. We got to get back to it and get it sorted out, right? So I'll stop there.
I actually think that sounds like that makes sense to me as well. So unless anyone else on the board objects, I think the suggestion would be to take the third item for now out and vote on the first two and expect to have the RAIM issue come back to us in the next couple of months, something like that. Does that make sense?
I am comfortable with that. I guess I just want to say on the record, this unless I can hear some really logical reason for these cutoff amounts, which I did not hear today, I would much prefer to see some sort of smooth penalty / bonus rather than qualifications that kick in at some magic number that the only explanation is that's how we have always done it, or it corresponds roughly to reserve margins, which are to outage expectations. That, I don't think those are good explanations. So, but yes.
Josh, could I just ask Anna's comments and then Elliot's comments? I'm taking from that discussion that delaying this matter for another couple of months while it exposes us to some level of business risk, it's not a big one, we hope, and that as a result it's reasonable. I'm a little concerned that as was commented earlier, that we've gone through a very long stakeholder process. It's disturbing to me that we're being presented today with yet another option. The whole purpose of stakeholder forums is to try and get people to put things out on the table so that everyone can look at them and discuss them. But if the sense of urgency is not there and that we do have a few months that we could take to look at this, then I'm okay with the delay.
Yeah, Ash.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just want to go on record also echoing Jan's thought. I think the staff has taken the time, they've thought it through. We've been briefed on this. The fact that this is an 11th hour, new suggestion, I don't think is great precedent myself. I appreciate that there may be a consideration of the entire program now, but I would like to say in general that I don't think we should be counteracting our staff after a major stakeholder process, that I would discourage the stakeholders from thinking that this is going to be common practice.
I would like to, yes, also express that very same sentiment, that the stakeholder process is a very open, inclusive process that we are very proud of as the ISO, and we try to make it available to everyone to participate in. So, Carrie, I know you are busy with EDAM, but I would urge you to pay enough attention to all the processes and not come in at the last minute like you are here. The comments may be valid, and we want to make sure that we address all concerns. And certainly, Anna, thank you for all your hard work and the team's hard work on this and for shepherding it through. And if you're comfortable delaying it for a month or so, and please consider, the board as a stakeholder, and especially Severin, to make sure that his issues are also addressed, then we can move forward and make sure that this is something that everyone is comfortable with. But again, if it's something that we can delay for a month or so and you have a comfort level that this is okay, I'm okay with it too.
Okay. And I will just say that I agree with particularly the sort of last minute proposal critique. At the same time, it is our job as the board to understand what we're voting on, and I think that I would definitely rather be informed of these sorts of disagreements, and I've made this comment generally, not get sent letters 1 or 2 days before the meeting, and if there are concerns, I at least, and I think all the board members are open to meeting with stakeholders and talking about them. So,
of course, and especially if there's any issue within the stakeholder process, the whole idea of the stakeholder process is to have these concerns identified, settled, embedded, and brought to us in a timely fashion. In this case, the process was circumvented.
We really appreciate the board's support for the stakeholder process, and also, we're going to always be committed to coming to the table with the very, very best explanations and run things through. And at the end of the day, we are very motivated to have a rock solid rate design, price formation, incentives, compensation. These are key pieces. So thank you for a little bit of additional length of time to go back and do a little bit more work on this. And to the other stakeholders who are involved in this process, I would like to honor your contributions to that, and we will, of course, be making sure we're considering all opinions as we move towards additional resolution on this topic. So thank you very much to everybody involved, and I think that probably gets us where we need to get to on this topic.
Elliot, may I make one clarification, perhaps, before we wrap it up? I just want to make sure it's clear that, in order to address the cap change issue that's being put forth to us here, it is not just a change to our overall, just this simple change we're trying to make. I want to make sure that it's clear that in order to address that, it is going to be more than a month or two to really look at the rate design of RAIN overall.
Yeah,
I hope that
understood.
is clear. And
I think that's right. I'm not necessarily hearing us say that this is an issue. This is an issue that, of course, fits into the broader elements. But if there is a way to take a little bit more time to address all the input that's come in from all the stakeholders on this topic. There's a diversity of opinion here, but to address this business need, eliminate this risk, but to address some of the points that admittedly have come in late, but I think have raised some questions, then we can get there. So we'll get right back to it, and we'll bring it back as expeditiously as possible, consistent with our other design principles.
And let me be clear, it's not just the last-minute proposal to lift the cap. I also actually, the more I think it through, I think Brian Thieker's objection that it seems very odd that the incentive payment would go down in a particular month just because a recalculation happens to drop during that month is also, there's something that just doesn't seem logical with that consequence. So that's another thing I think it's worth looking at. And that, I think, is an objection that was raised in the, during the stakeholder process.
And let me just say, Anna, I first of all, I really appreciate all the work and the process. My general discomfort with the structure of RAIM is not something I would expect you to address in 1 or 2 months, but I would like to keep it on the horizon, because I would generally like to see us clean up these sorts of weird incentives that get built when people don't think carefully through the process, and we get these cutoffs that create weird incentives for market participants.
All right, let's move on, because I think we're a little bit behind schedule at this point. Are there any more comments? Or we heard all the comments, operator?
We do have someone else in the queue.
Okay.
Call your lines unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Chair Bhagwat, this is Brian Baker. I was going to comment early on something that Severn raised, but in light of the discussion, I'll stand down. Thank you.
Thank you. For the sake of schedules. All right, then Roger, can you, anything more from the board? Then Roger, can you create immediately, in a lawyerly fashion, a motion that deals with the first 2 items, but not the third?
Well, I can, because as I understand the discussion, we are striking the RAIM reference from the motion. So I think and correct me if I'm wrong, Anna, but I believe that just leaving in the central procurement entity implementation in the motion will satisfy the concerns, and we will, in just striking it where it says, and the resource adequacy availability language. Anna, do you agree with that?
Correct. Yes, I do agree with that. If you strike that out, the memo, I will note also that the memo has a similar categorization, so it could easily be.
And I will also reference in the motion as discussed at today's meeting. So let's try this.
Right, because here's the problem, is that, Roger, my concern is there were 3 issues. And issue number 2 doesn't seem to be showing, which is that LSCs operating in multiple tax. That has nothing to do with the central procurement entity. So the motion itself seems to not match the presentation.
Well, I think there was a relationship, if I could answer that. The reason why that was put together that way is that there is a relationship with regards to the CPE, where the change we're now making and integrating the CPE further requires that change, and it was lumped in with that item.
Okay.
The RAIM aspect of it is entirely severable.
Okay.
The other 2 are not entirely severable.
So we will still be voting on issues 1 and 2.
Yes, and let that record show that, and then I'm happy to go forward.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the clarification and for the good questions. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the Central Procurement Entity implementation as described in the memorandum dated March 8, 2022, and as further discussed at the March 17, 2022 General Session meeting of the Board of Governors. Move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal as described, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. On that, can we have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. I'm sorry, who was second? Was that you, Governor Leslie? Oh, that was Jan, sorry. Excellent. Governor Bhagwat, your vote, please.
Aye.
Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Governor Galitova?
Aye.
Governor Leslie?
Aye.
And Governor Shorey.
Aye.
Thank you, Governors. The motion passes as revised.
All right, and thank you, everyone, and thank you especially to staff for your flexibility. I really appreciate your engaging with the board and being willing to be as responsive as you've been. All right, our next item is the decision on authorization for settlement recalculations. There's Mr. Subakti.
Good morning, Chair Bhagwat and Governors. Today, I am here to provide background and introduction for our next topic, which is really requesting the board to direct California ISO management to perform unscheduled recalculation settlement to distribute the pool of funds collected under the resource adequacy availability mechanism, otherwise known, and we've been talking about RAME. So this unscheduled recalculation settlement is needed because the ISO did have a process gap in our manual procedures within our settlement process. While this gap has since been remediated, we still need to allocate that RAME funds to the right market participant. So with that, I would like to introduce Heather Kelly, who is the Director of our Operations Service Compliance and Analysis. Ms. Kelly will be providing more detailed presentations on the topic. So Ms. Kelly, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Dee Dee. Just sound check, can you hear me? A little soft. You can speak up, Heather, that'd be great. Okay, I will speak up, thank you. So next slide, please. So as Dee Dee mentioned, I am here to request the board authorize an out-of-time 36-month settlement statement and invoice so that the ISO can distribute RAME incentives to the appropriate market participants. Next slide. So for trade dates in 2018, the ISO was on a 36-month settlement cycle. There were 7 settlement statements published between each trade date and 36 months after the trade date. The first 3 statements are required, and the remaining 4 are published in an event that there are incremental changes between statements. While researching an unrelated settlement dispute, one of our settlement staff calculated but did not publish the August 2018 36-month settlement statement. And when they did that, they realized that there were rollover RAME incentives in that statement. This had not been done previously because there was a process deficiency where one of our staff did not manually check that we needed to run that 36-month statement. And that is a process gap around these RAME charge codes. As we talked about in the last topic, the RAME charge codes calculate non-availability charges to RA resources based on performance. And then they distribute, the charge codes distribute those charges to high-performing RA resources as incentives. So it's a self-funded charge code, and excess incentives, they roll over from month to month. Had the ISO calculated and published the 36-month statement for August 2018, we would have seen the surplus of RAME charges rolled over from previous months. And this would have triggered us to calculate and run the September 2018 36-month statement to allocate these incentives to those high-performing resources. This process gap has been resolved. We have created an automated validation to check for unallocated RAME funds to flag the need to recalculate a 36-month statement if there are excess funds. Next slide. So the ISO would like to request permission to calculate and publish the August and September 2018 36-month statements and invoices as an out-of-sequence settlement. This way we can distribute those incentives to the deserving RA resources. Per our tariff, we cannot do that without board approval. So I did also want to point out that no additional funds will be collected with these statements and invoices. We will just be paying out.
So where's the money coming from?
So the money is in our holding account. We collect RAIM penalties and we put them in a holding account. We pay out RAIM incentives, and if there's extra, we roll it over from month to month at the end of the year, which is where we're at in this time frame. We pay it out to the high-performing resources, and that's what we need to do. So the money is there already.
All right. Board, any questions?
I would just ask that the manual error that occurred, you have corrected for that. So once we make this adjustment, we vote today, you're good. You're back with it. Okay.
Yeah, and we're already back. This is just for that end of year 2018. So.
Got it. So you're closing it out on the prior year. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Any public comment?
If you would like to make a comment, please use your raise hand icon located at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on the phone, press #2 to enter the queue. No one in the queue at this time?
Okay. Then, Roger, I think we're ready for a motion.
Thank you, Chair Bhagwat. Move that the ISO Board of Governors directs management to perform unscheduled directed recalculation settlement statements as necessary and appropriate to distribute the pool of funds described in the memorandum dated March 9, 2022. Motion?
So moved.
Angelina. A second?
Second, Jan.
Thank you. Chair Bhagwat, your vote?
Aye. I will point out that my name is misspelled. But despite that, aye.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh.
Now you can't vote. Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Governor Galetova?
Aye.
Vice Chair Leslie?
Aye.
And Governor Shorey?
Aye.
Thank you, governors. The motion passes. And Ash, let me apologize. So many ayes go over these things, and it's just kind of ironic too. I hope it's not. I don't think I saw that in the other motions, but we will add another check on there.
It's no big deal. And frankly,
no, but you hate when you see that happen, though. Just hate to see that happen. It's such a little thing at the end of the day, right? If that's the worst thing, but it's embarrassing. But thank you, governors, and thank you for your patience. And I think we are on to the next item.
So next item is information reports. Are there any questions from the board? Seeing none, future agenda items. Okay, good. Well, then seeing none, I think we will end the general session, and we are back in executive session at 12:30. So.
Thank you,
everyone.
Chair Bhagwat. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.